There is a peculiar kind of sorrow that does not announce itself with loud wailing or a stream of endless tears. It's the quiet ache that settles in the chest when one realizes they were never truly loved by the very people who were meant to cherish them. It is not the world's rejection that breaks us most. It is the rejection that comes from our own blood, from those whose names we share, from those who should have stood by our side when the world turned its back. What do you do when the ones meant to protect you are the first to wound you? You were born into their story, stitched into the fabric of their family line, and yet you feel like a stranger at the table. They laugh, but you don't. They gather, but you're not invited. They know your name, but never your heart. There's something unspoken in the air whenever you walk into the room. A tension, a dismissal, a silent verdict that you do not belong. You try harder, you love louder, you give, serve, and sacrifice, and still the doors remain closed. No matter what you do, it is never enough. Have you asked yourself, why? What if the answer lies not in what you've done, but in who you are? There is a truth, an uncomfortable, jarring truth, that some people, even family, will despise you for merely existing outside of their small expectations. They see the light in you, and rather than celebrate it, they curse it. They feel threatened by your growth, by your difference, by your refusal to conform to their dysfunction. They mock your dreams, belittle your character, and twist your intentions. And the cruelest part? They do it all while claiming to love you. This betrayal by blood is not a rare phenomenon. It is ancient. It is Cain and Abel. It is Joseph thrown into the pit by his brothers. It is David chased by his own son. Scripture itself is stained with the sorrow of family rejection. Not because these people were unworthy, but because they were chosen, called, set apart. And being set apart is often the very reason your family sets you aside. You are not rejected because you are weak. You are rejected because you carry something too powerful to be understood by those still living in fear. Your truth unsettles their lies. Your freedom irritates their bondage. Your integrity confronts their deception. And so, rather than face their own darkness, they make you the enemy. But is it truly rejection, or is it divine redirection? Is it possible that what feels like betrayal is actually protection? Could it be that God is removing you from the crowd that would crush your purpose? Could it be that your family's rejection is the very thing that will catapult you into your calling? Before you let their words define you, pause. Before you absorb their bitterness into your identity, breathe. You are not who they say you are. You are not unloved, unwanted, or unworthy. You are simply too awakened for their slumber, too alive for their dead traditions, too chosen to be casually accepted. Now, you stand at a crossroads. You can keep pleading for their approval, keep twisting yourself into someone they might tolerate, or you can begin the journey of becoming the person God has always known you to be, even if it means walking alone. If you've felt the sting of being cast out by your own family, if your heart carries the silent wound of betrayal by blood, then let us go deeper now. For in the shadows of rejection, there is often a shocking truth waiting to be uncovered. You challenge the darkness they're still living in. There's a reason the room feels colder when you walk in. A reason why the laughter dies down, the smiles turn stiff, and the conversations shift away from anything meaningful. You may not say a word, but your presence alone becomes a mirror to their hidden shame. You don't carry arrogance or pride. You carry truth. And the truth is, you are no longer like them, and they know it. You grew in places they chose to wither. You healed what they buried. You face the trauma they ignored, and now they look at you with a quiet fury that has nothing to do with anything you've done wrong. It is your light that offends their shadows, your clarity that disrupts their denial. You live honestly, and that honesty reveals the lies they've built their lives upon. You don't belong at their table, not because you lack value, but because your soul is no longer for sale. You don't gossip with them, you don't celebrate bitterness, you don't laugh at cruelty, you don't pretend everything is fine when it's not. And that makes you dangerous, not to the world, but to their comfort zones. Because if one of them, one of their own, could rise above the poison, what does that say about the rest who still drink from it? They fear what you've become, because deep down they know they could have chosen the same path, but didn't. They could have broken free. They could have chosen healing. They could have stopped the cycle. But they stayed and you left. Not physically, perhaps, but spiritually, emotionally. You departed from the dysfunction. You refused to continue the script. You tore the mask off your identity and said, I will no longer play the role you've written for me. You were born into the same soil, but you grew in a different direction, and it bothers them. Your joy, your resilience, your refusal to break, it all whispers a truth they tried desperately to silence. They could have been more. And so, instead of admiring your courage, they attack your character. They twist your intentions, distort your past, and label your independence as rebellion. Because if they can reduce your identity, maybe they won't have to face their own. Have you ever wondered why you feel so heavy after family gatherings? Why it feels like you have to shrink, contort, or numb yourself just to be tolerated? It's not in your head. That weight is real. It's the emotional tension of being in a space where your soul isn't safe, where every word you say is dissected, every silence misinterpreted, every boundary viewed as betrayal. But here's what you must know in the marrow of your bones. Their discomfort is not your responsibility. You are not the villain for healing. You are not wrong for evolving. And you are not disloyal for refusing to be poisoned by what they've normalized. They loved you better when you were broken because your brokenness kept them comfortable. But now that you've started to mend, they don't know how to love the version of you that no longer needs them to survive. And so they reject what they cannot understand. You are not too much. You are simply not willing to be less. And for that they resent you. But even if they never say it, even if they never acknowledge it, something deep in their hearts whispers a truth louder than their judgment. You were the brave one. You were the one who said no more. And though they may never applaud you for it, heaven does. You were never meant to inherit their broken legacy. There comes a moment when you realize you're carrying burdens that were never yours to begin with. Guilt that was inherited, shame that was passed down like an heirloom, pain wrapped in silence, presented to you as identity, but you were never meant to inherit their broken legacy. You were born into it, yes, but you were never meant to keep it. Your family may never say it out loud, but you were chosen to break what they were too afraid to confront. The curses they normalized, the secrets they buried, the trauma they called tradition. You were not sent into that bloodline to blend in. You were sent to rise above it. But rising above always comes at a cost. The first price you pay is isolation. You'll feel the sting of being misunderstood, the ache of being cast out, the whisper behind your back that you're ungrateful, dramatic, too different. But let's tell the truth. You were never rejecting your family. You were rejecting the dysfunction they asked you to accept as normal. You refused to keep pretending the yelling was love. You refused to believe the manipulation was just culture. You refused to hand your future over to patterns that destroyed those before you, and in doing so, you crossed a silent line. You became the outsider. But hear this clearly. You didn't break the family. The family was already broken. You were simply the one honest enough to see it. They'll call you selfish, but they won't mention the years you stayed quiet to keep peace. They'll call you difficult, but they won't mention the nights you cried yourself to sleep, hoping to be understood. They'll say you've changed, but they won't mention how much it hurt to stay the same. You were never meant to carry their chains. That anger passed down from father to son, that bitterness wrapped in a mother's voice, that envy disguised as tough love, it was never meant to sit on your shoulders. And yet, here you are, fighting to build something better with the same bricks they used to build prisons. It's not easy to reject a legacy, because when you do, you're not just walking away from pain, you're walking into loneliness. You're rebuilding with no blueprint, no guide, no applause. You're forging a new path through thick generational fog, and at times it feels like betrayal. But the real betrayal is pretending that the poison didn't affect you, that the words didn't hurt, that the wounds don't exist. You are not betraying them by acknowledging the truth. You are breaking free. They may never understand your journey. They may never support your healing, but that doesn't make your path any less valid. You were never meant to inherit their brokenness. You were meant to become the evidence that healing is possible. And somewhere down the line, years from now, when your children walk freely, when your spirit shines without shame, when peace lives where pain once ruled, you'll realize something powerful. You didn't just survive your bloodline, you redeemed it. They resent what they can't control in you. They used to love you more when you were quiet, when you obeyed, submitted, and never questioned the way things were. You were easier to digest when you made yourself small, when you didn't stand up for yourself, when you lived to please, when your voice was soft and your dreams were silent. But now you've changed, you've awakened, and suddenly you've become a problem. It's not that you stopped loving them, it's that you stopped surrendering to their control. You stopped letting their moods decide your worth. You stopped begging for their validation. You stopped bending every time they wanted you to break. And for that, they resent you, not because you've done wrong, but because they can no longer shape you into something that serves their comfort. They once held power over you, emotional, mental, and spiritual power. You tried so hard to earn their love. You shaped your identity around their approval. You became who they wanted you to be, not who you were meant to be. And each time you silenced yourself for their sake, you thought you were being loyal. You thought you were keeping peace, but peace built on control is not peace. It's quiet oppression. Now, you've stepped out of the mold. You started to think for yourself. You've put up boundaries. You've begun speaking the truth, even when your voice trembles. You've stopped apologizing for existing differently. And that's what they can't stand. Because as long as they could control you, they felt powerful. As long as you submitted, they felt secure. You were their puppet, and now you've cut the strings. And it terrifies them. It terrifies them that you no longer chase their crumbs, that you've built strength without their permission, that your eyes now see clearly what you once accepted blindly. Because if you no longer need them to tell you who you are, what purpose do they serve? So they turn against you. Subtly at first, they withhold affection, they twist your intentions, They call you selfish, rebellious, difficult. They say you've changed. But deep down, they know the truth. You've evolved. And that evolution breaks the spell. You see, when you begin to heal, you break the system of emotional dependency they thrived on. You disrupt the dynamics that gave them a sense of control. You no longer tolerate manipulation disguised as love. You no longer play along with the guilt they used to silence your voice. And that makes you dangerous to their illusions. But you were not born to be their puppet. You were born to walk in your own purpose, to speak with your own voice, to live in the freedom they fear. If this feels familiar, if you've been punished for refusing to be controlled, understand this: you are not wrong for breaking free. You are not cruel for seeking truth. You are not ungrateful for desiring peace. You are simply no longer willing to live a life that isn't yours. And for those who once used love as a leash, your freedom will always look like betrayal. You carry a calling that terrifies their comfort. You may not realize it, but the very weight you feel, the rejection, the distance, the strange coldness from those who once held you close, is not because you've failed them. It's because you carry something too sacred for them to understand. You carry a calling, a light, a purpose, a divine assignment, and that threatens everything they've grown comfortable with. You weren't made to fit in. You weren't born to follow the path they've walked, repeating their regrets and calling it tradition. You were called to build something new, something higher, something that demands sacrifice, truth, and courage. And those who've chosen comfort over growth will always find your calling offensive. They say they love you, but love has become conditional. It hinges on how much of yourself you're willing to hide, how much you're willing to shrink, how silent you're willing to become about what God placed inside you. But the calling won't stay quiet. It whispers to you in the middle of the night. It stirs when you sit among them, pretending to be someone else. It burns inside you every time you silence your own voice to protect their feelings. It aches in your chest every time you lower your light just to be accepted. They don't hate your dreams. They hate that your dreams make theirs feel forgotten. They don't hate your truth. They hate that your truth reveals the lies they've lived in. They don't hate your purpose. They hate that your purpose reminds them of the one they abandon. So they reject you, or they mock you, or they try to pull you back into the box they once placed you in. But the box no longer fits. The lid has been removed. The calling has grown too large to contain, and you feel torn because you want to be loved by them. You want them to see you, to believe in you, to walk with you. But they can't go where you're going, not because they're evil, but because your calling requires a solitude they fear. You were made to carry something they cannot carry. You were chosen to step into places they've never dared walk. And the more you answer the call, the more distant they'll become. Not because you pushed them away, but because your presence now unsettles their stagnation. You didn't ask to be different. You didn't ask for the weight of vision or the ache of knowing you were made for more. But now that you see it, you cannot unsee it. And no amount of rejection can erase what's been written on your soul. So if they turn their backs on you, let them. If they mock your journey, keep walking. Because what they fear in you is what heaven has placed in you. And no rejection from man can remove what was designed by God. Their love is conditional, rooted in conformity, not connection. It takes time to realize the love you received wasn't truly love, that it came with terms, conditions, rules unspoken but strictly enforced. You were taught to perform for affection, to earn closeness by sacrificing authenticity, to be accepted only if you remained within their expectations. And so you learned to survive, not by being yourself, but by becoming whatever they needed you to be. You smiled when you wanted to scream. You agreed when you knew the truth was different. You gave when your heart was empty. All because you thought that if you were just good enough, you would finally be loved. But what they gave you wasn't love. It was a contract, a fragile agreement that said, "We will treat you kindly only if you never disrupt our comfort." And the moment you broke the terms by speaking your truth, by setting a boundary, by asking to be loved without pretending, they changed. The warmth disappeared. The kindness vanished. Suddenly you were too sensitive, too difficult, too distant. They didn't say it directly, but the message was clear. You're no longer lovable because you no longer comply. Do you feel that? That ache inside your chest that wonders why the ones who should have loved you best made you feel like a burden? That heaviness that comes when you realize your love for them was unconditional, but theirs had limits you could never quite understand until you crossed them. They loved you when you were quiet. They loved you when you agreed. They loved you when you performed. But when you started healing, when you stopped seeking their permission to grow, when you found your own voice, they didn't know how to love that version of you, the real you, the whole you. And that's the heartbreak that doesn't get spoken of enough. Not the loss of connection, but the realization that what you thought was love was only tolerance, and even that was temporary. You wanted connection, they wanted conformity. You craved depth, they offered control. You offered truth, they gave you silence. And for so long you told yourself you were the problem. You convinced yourself that if you were just a little more obedient, a little less emotional, a little more like them, they would embrace you. But no matter how much you bent yourself to fit their mold, it was never enough. Because their love was never rooted in who you truly were. It was rooted in how useful, compliant, and predictable you remained. That is not love. Love does not demand you hide. Love does not withdraw when you become honest. Love does not punish you for growing. But you've lived so long inside that distortion that now, when people try to love the real you, you flinch. You question their motives. You wonder, will they still want me when I speak my truth? Because your past taught you that being fully yourself is the fastest way to lose the ones you love. But what if it's not you that was unlovable, but the love you were offered that was broken? What if your family didn't fail to love you because of your flaws, but because of your freedom? Because the moment you stopped playing the role, the mask no longer fit, and they couldn't love what they couldn't understand. You see, conditional love isn't really love at all. It's a transaction. And you are not a transaction. You are not meant to be earned, bartered, tolerated, or trained into acceptance. You were born worthy, worthy of love that stays, love that heals, love that says, even when you don't meet my expectations, I still choose you. But when family demands conformity and calls it love, you must have the courage to walk away, not in bitterness, but in truth. Because if love costs you your soul, your identity, your freedom, then it's not love. It's control dressed in familiarity. And you, dear soul, were never created to live in the shadows of someone else's comfort. You were created to be seen, known, and loved fully. Not just when you perform, but even when you stand boldly as yourself. They project their own self-hatred onto you. There is a pain more complex than rejection, more haunting than abandonment. It is the pain of becoming the target of someone else's inner war. When your family wounds you, not because you are broken, but because they are. When they look at you with eyes that see not who you are, but who they could never become. That kind of pain settles deep into your bones. It doesn't shout. It doesn't bruise the skin. It lingers in silence, in glances, in the invisible weight you carry every time you enter the room. They project onto you the very feelings they've buried inside themselves, the shame they've never faced, the dreams they've let die, the resentment they hold toward their own failures. They lay it all at your feet. You become the scapegoat for emotions they cannot name, for darkness they cannot admit. And so, instead of healing, they choose to hurt. Instead of reflection, they choose blame. You, who only ever wanted to be seen and loved, become the container for all the pain they refuse to confront in themselves. You may have noticed how they twist your strengths into threats. Your kindness becomes manipulation in their eyes. Your peace becomes arrogance. Your confidence is labeled rebellion. They call you difficult, not because you've done harm, but because your very presence disturbs the fragile lies they've told themselves. They see you choosing peace, and it reminds them of their chaos. They see you speaking truth, and it reminds them of the silence they were too afraid to break. You live with intention, and it forces them to confront the aimlessness of their own lives. You've always wondered why your love wasn't enough, why your loyalty didn't earn their affection, why, no matter how much you gave, it never softened them. The truth is, their rejection isn't about your worth. It's about their wounds. But instead of healing, they target you, because hurting you is easier than facing their own reflection. And in some tragic way, your pain becomes their relief. They feel more in control when you're broken. They feel safer when you're silent. It's easier for them to believe you are the problem than to accept the truth that they are still bleeding inside and have done nothing to stop it. They may even accuse you of being too emotional, too dramatic, too sensitive. But what they really mean is that your presence makes them feel something, and they've spent their entire lives trying not to feel. You are a mirror to their abandoned dreams, to the child within them that was never comforted, to the broken pieces they've wrapped in pride and denial. And when you dare to live freely, they cannot handle it, because your freedom reminds them of their chains. This is why your victories make them uncomfortable, why your growth agitates them, why your light seems to trigger their darkness. It's not because you did something wrong, it's because you survived something they are still trapped in. They see you healing, becoming whole, finding purpose, and instead of being inspired, they feel accused. Not by your words, but by your existence. So they lash out, or they withdraw, or they remain close just enough to criticize, just enough to confuse you, just enough to keep you wondering what you did wrong. But deep down, you know, you've always known. This isn't about who you are. It's about what you reflect. You've become the place they unload everything they cannot carry within themselves. And though you did not ask for it, you've been forced to hold emotions that were never yours to begin with. It's exhausting, isn't it? Carrying their bitterness while managing your own healing. Being the strong one, the soft one, the grounded one. All while they pour their poison into your spirit and call it parenting or culture or tradition. But you are not a dumping ground for broken souls. You are not a reflection of their regret. You are not responsible for the wounds they refuse to heal. You deserve to be loved without being blamed. You deserve to be celebrated without being resented. And you deserve to be seen for who you are, not who they can't accept themselves to be. They project their self-hatred onto you because it is easier to destroy someone else's peace than to face the war inside their own heart. But you are not their enemy. You never were. You were simply the one who chose to grow, while they chose to remain stuck. God is separating you for something sacred. There are times in life when the deepest form of love comes wrapped in the most painful form of isolation. You don't always recognize it at first, but something begins to shift. The people you once called family begin to grow cold. The rooms you used to feel safe in start to feel suffocating. The conversations grow shorter, the glances colder. You sit at the same table, but something inside you knows you don't belong here anymore. And that truth doesn't come with celebration. It doesn't come with applause. It often comes with heartbreak. Because being separated by God isn't always a grand revelation. Sometimes it looks like unanswered phone calls, like being left out, like hearing that your name was mentioned when you weren't around, but not in love. It looks like being labeled different, difficult, disloyal. It looks like tears on your pillow because you can't understand why the people you'd do anything for seem to do everything to avoid you. But what if this isn't abandonment? What if this isn't rejection? What if it's divine intervention? There are moments when God steps into your story, and not by giving, but by taking. Not by adding more people, but by removing the wrong ones. And when it comes to family, that process is unbearable. Because we expect strangers to misunderstand us, but we never expect our own blood to become unfamiliar. We expect the world to wound us, but not the ones who held us as children, laughed with us in the living room, prayed at the same table. Yet that's where the sacred separation begins. Because there is something God wants to do in your life that cannot happen in the atmosphere you were raised in. He has called you to build something that cannot grow in the soil of bitterness, competition, and silent resentment. He wants to elevate your spirit, but the voices around you only want to anchor you in who you used to be. And so, the separation begins. Not to punish you, but to preserve what's being born inside you. You may have noticed how your spirit started to crave silence more than small talk. How the drama began to exhaust you. How the cycles started to feel heavier. How your peace began to mean more than their approval. That's not pride, that's spiritual growth. And it is often the first sign that God is pulling you into something deeper, something quieter, something sacred. But before He brings you into new spaces, He has to clear out the old ones. You were not created to be tolerated. You were not designed to survive in rooms where you are consistently misunderstood, where your spirit is stifled, where your heart is heavy. And yet, because of loyalty, because of blood, you kept going back, hoping they would change, praying they would see you, aching for some form of recognition that never came. But God saw. He saw the nights you cried after, smiling all day. He saw the effort you made to keep peace while they kept creating chaos. He saw how you tried to hold everyone together even as they pulled you apart. He saw the weight you carried just to be included. And now He's saying, enough. You don't have to carry what's killing you. You don't have to keep proving your heart to people who've already decided who you are. Because what's ahead of you requires room, spiritual room, emotional room, mental room. And as long as you remain in environments where your worth is questioned, your identity dismissed, and your gifts hidden, you will always live below the level God has called you to rise to. Separation is not cruelty, it's a sacred setup. It's heaven's way of clearing the noise so you can hear God clearly. It's the divine hand of protection pulling you from the familiar, not to punish you, but to prepare you. Sometimes God has to remove you from people you thought you couldn't live without to show you that you were depending on them more than you were depending on Him. Sometimes He separates you not because they are evil, but because they are limited. and what He's placed in you cannot be contained by their vision of you. They see your past, He sees your purpose. They see your flaws, He sees your fire. They see what makes you inconvenient, He sees what makes you chosen. And so He begins to distance you, not to isolate you in despair, but to insulate you in destiny. You begin to notice the conversations dry up, the invitations stop, the warmth fades. It feels like loss, but it's actually alignment. Because you weren't created to be a prisoner of people's comfort zones. You were born to step into the fullness of who you are. And sometimes that means walking alone, for a while, through the wilderness of rejection, until you arrive at the place where your name is not only known, but honored. What if this distance is the beginning of your destiny? What if every moment of loneliness is making space for a divine encounter? What if the people who left were never meant to go where you're going? Because some blessings are so sacred, God will not allow them to be contaminated by familiar hands. And some callings are so heavy, God will not allow you to be surrounded by those who will only drop you. And so, piece by piece, He removes, He silences, He closes doors, He breaks attachments, and though it feels like a storm, it's really a clearing, a cleansing, a holy hush before the revelation begins. Now you see it clearly, not as a curse, but as a calling, not as punishment, but as preparation. Every wound you received at the hands of those you trusted was not the end of your story, it was the beginning of your becoming. What felt like rejection was God's redirection. What appeared to be abandonment was in fact divine alignment. You were never forsaken, you were being set apart. Your pain has a purpose, your sorrow is not wasted. Every silent tear, every whispered prayer, every lonely moment, it was building something in you. A strength that doesn't shout, but stands. A clarity that doesn't beg to be understood, but lives truthfully. A peace that isn't dependent on who stays, but on who you've become. You may never receive the apology you deserve. They may never understand your heart. They may never recognize the light within you. But you don't need their approval to fulfill your assignment. You don't need their affection to know your worth. Because your worth was never defined by their ability to see you. It was defined by the one who made you. Yes, you were betrayed by blood. Yes, the rejection hurt in ways you still don't have words for, but you were never alone. God was there in every moment. He saw it all. He recorded every injustice, every wound, every betrayal. And He is not only your witness, He is your restorer. He is the one who will lift you in front of the very ones who tried to bury you. He is the one who will crown you in the place where they tried to curse you. So stand tall, not in bitterness, but in clarity. Walk forward, not with revenge, but with purpose. Let them say what they will. Let them misunderstand you. Let them walk away. You are not what they called you. You are not what they projected onto you. You are chosen. You are called. And you are walking in a story far greater than their small minds could ever comprehend. There is no greater freedom than this, to be rejected by people, but embraced by God, to be cast aside by man, but carried forward by the divine. Your pain has shaped you, your isolation has refined you, and now it is time to rise, not to prove anything, but simply to become everything you were always meant to be. Your healing is holy, your voice is needed, your story is sacred, and your destiny is waiting.